Hey, welcome back to our study we're calling Counterculture. I'm Pastor Stephen, and last week we looked at chapter 3, and we looked at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as they were unwilling to bow before the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. They had courage to stand in the face of culture, to not go with the flow, but go against the flow and stand on their personal convictions and beliefs. One of my favorite statements that they made is that, King, we won't bow to your statue no matter what you do to us. And they said, our God is able to deliver us, but if he does not, we will not bow. And they had that kind of faith, that kind of courage to stand against culture. Today, we're going to look at the end of King Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to look at another dream that he has in chapter 4 as we talk about the price of pride. So if you want to look in chapter 4, we look in verse 1. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar sent this message to the people of every race and nation and language throughout the world. He says this, peace and prosperity to you. I want you all to know about the miraculous signs and wonders to the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how powerful his wonders. His kingdom will last forever, his rule through all the generations. Let's kind of stop right there for a moment. So if we're talking about pride, this is kind of the opposite, right? Here we see the most powerful king in the whole world is giving all credit, is giving all glory to God. And you would say, well, where's pride in that? We've got to look at the rest of chapter 4 to kind of see what's going on. And this is maybe not the most well-known chapter in the book of Daniel, but it is one of the most interesting, I believe. This is actually a narrative written by King Nebuchadnezzar to all these people about something that happened to him. And as we continue in verse 4, he says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living in my palace in comfort and prosperity. The one night I had a dream that frightened me. And he says, I saw visions that terrified me as I was laying in my bed, so I issued an order calling in the wise men of Babylon so they could tell me what my dream meant. When all the magicians and enchanters and astrologers and fortune tellers came in, I told them my dream, but they could not tell me what it meant. Sound familiar? We go back to chapter 2 and we see the same thing, right? At last, Daniel came in before me and I told him my dream. He was named Belshazzar after my God, and the spirit of the holy gods in him. I said to him, Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, I tell you, I know the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too great for you to solve. Now tell me what my dream means. See, here we see a man who is giving a message to some people. And it is a message to those who would listen about a man who learned a very valuable lesson. Our culture has a pride issue. This man had a pride issue who learned a very valuable lesson. And God does not allow the prideful to stand very long. He begins this chapter singing praises to God, yet if you continue with the chapter, you have to wonder, how did he get to this point? How did he get from where he was to a point of praising God and giving all glory to God? See, in this dream, as he recounts this dream, and I'm not going to go read it all, but you can read it for yourself. But basically what is happening is he dreams this dream about a tree that is standing tall. And this tree represents King Nebuchadnezzar with a prosperous nation and great power. Then we see that someone comes in and chops down this tree, which represents that King Nebuchadnezzar's reign was about to come to a halt. His power, his prosperity was about to come to a halt. His being in a comfortable palace and living the life of luxury was about to come to a halt. If we continue reading here, Daniel interprets his dream, and he's very saddened by what he reads here. He even says, I wish the events foreshadowed in this dream would happen to your enemies, he says, and not to you. He says, the tree you saw growing tall and strong, reaching high into the heavens for all the world to see, it had fresh green leaves and was loaded with fruit for all to eat. Wild animals lived in its shade, and the birds nested in its branches. That tree, your majesty, is you, for you have grown strong and great. Your greatness reaches up to heaven, and you rule to the ends of the earth. Then he says, I saw a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump and the roots in the ground, bound with a band of iron and bronze, and surrounded by tender grass. Let him be drenched with the dew of the heaven. Let him live with the animals of the field for 7 periods of time. So basically what Daniel is saying here is that the tree in the dream represents you, King Nebuchadnezzar, and your prosperity and in your rule. But then one day you're going to be cut down and you're going to be driven from your kingdom, and you're going to live as a wild animal eating grass for 7 years. So look at what happens here. This is what the period means. And it says, but the stump and the roots of the tree were left in the ground. This means you will receive your kingdom back again when you have learned that heaven rules. See, the reason that he's going to go through this time of trial is because of his pride issue. And that's kind of where we get here, is we develop pride. This is the first point I want to give you, is we develop pride when we quit relying on the power of God. If we continue in verse 28, it says that the king looked out upon his roof and said, look at this great city of Babylon. A year later, 1 year later, he's on this roof and he says, look at this great city of Babylon. His own words, look at what he says. By my own power, I have built this city as my royal residence to display my majestic splendor. And after he said that, at that very moment, the dream became a reality, and the king was driven from the city, living as a wild animal for 7 years until his sanity returned and his kingdom was restored to him. It says that his hair grew so long that it looked like eagle's feathers, and his nails were like birds' claws. Could you imagine the most powerful king in all of the world now living as a wild animal? It says over and over the king had witnessed the power of God. He witnessed the wisdom granted to Daniel in chapter 2, how Daniel was able to interpret his dream that no one else could, how Daniel was able to save not only his friends, but all the wise men and all the kingdom from a certain fate from the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar. He also witnessed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar himself being thrown into the fiery furnace for defying King Nebuchadnezzar, and yet God himself was present in the fire. There was another in the fire that protected them, and they were able to come through unscathed. And that was all the power of God. And he witnessed this over and over again. Yet in all this time, the king was still allowing his personal pride, his personal drive to please himself and become his goal. Even when Daniel once again interprets his dream and reveals that if he continues on this path of pride, that he will eventually end up in a place of humility. The king did not listen. See, pride is not something you initially possess, but something you develop. It is a process of distancing yourself from God and from giving God the credit and taking the credit. See, pride is something that happens when you quit relying on God and start relying on your own power and your own self. See, we may not present ourselves as prideful. We may not admit that we're prideful, but when we choose to live our lives apart from God, distancing ourselves from God, and refuse to give God the credit and honor that He deserves, we are living in pride, and there is a price for that pride. See, the second point I want to give you is that the higher pride takes you, the farther it will drop you. The real scary part is the more prideful you are, the bigger the fall. No one is immune to the price of pride. Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful king in all of the world at that time, fell so far he became humiliated by living as an animal, eating grass, and unrecognizable that I'm sure he became the laughingstock of the whole kingdom. Think about some of the most powerful people, the most famous people that have some pretty bad downfalls. I'm a golfer, so one of the biggest ones I think of is Tiger Woods. The most powerful, the best golfer in all the world number one, fell so far because of his pride and because of his sin. Other actors like Robert Downey Jr., who now is Iron Man, you know him as Iron Man, but at one time became so addicted to drugs and alcohol that he was imprisoned. Presidents like Bill Clinton and so many others who were in a position of power that let their pride become their downfall. Power does not come from position or talent or ability, but comes from humility. True power, and this is what I mean by this, is being able to humble yourself and position yourself in a way that it reveals the true power, the true glory that is in God. The most powerful king in all the world lived like an animal for 7 years eating grass. So not only is there a price for pride, but pride has no place in the presence of God. And that's my third point for you. Do you know why so many people fall when they get prideful? It is because pride has no place in the presence of God. God will not allow pride to stand for long. God is the only one that deserves the glory. You and I don't deserve it. Without God, no one would have anything. No one would have talent, money, fame, position, or opportunity. Pride has no place in the presence of God. And once Nebuchadnezzar realized that, he gave God the glory and the honor. See, God humbles the proud one way or another. He finishes out this chapter by saying his rule is everlasting, and his kingdom is eternal. All the people of the earth are nothing compared to him. Who? God. He does as he pleases among the angels of heaven and among the people of earth. No one can stop him or say to him, "What do you mean by doing these things?" So verse 36, this is what King Nebuchadnezzar says. "When my sanity returned to me, so did my honor and glory and kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored as head of my kingdom with even greater honor than before. Now," he says, "I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and glorify and honor the King of heaven and all of his acts, which are just and true, and he is able to humble the proud." See, King Nebuchadnezzar wasn't restored until he learned a very valuable lesson, that pride has no place in the presence of God, that God only reveals himself and is favored among those who are humble before his presence. So what is the lesson that we need to learn? Is that the price of pride is a fall. And we've got to learn from the example of Nebuchadnezzar and get rid of pride and arrogance and this idea that we can do it without God. See, our culture is full of pride and distancing themselves from the power and presence of God, not acknowledging that God is the one that deserves the glory and honor. And if we just live our lives by saying that, "God, you're the reason I live, you're the reason I can do all this, you're the reason for my talent, you're the reason for my ability, you're the reason for where I am and what I'm doing, you deserve the honor and glory." See, in the Proverbs it says, "Trust God with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight." See, what does that mean? It means as long as you give God glory, as long as you give God the credit that he deserves, then he's going to reveal the path for you to walk down on, and he's going to be with you every step of the way. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this lesson, and it is such a crazy story about a king who lost his focus in God and was humbled in a way that no one, I don't think, has ever been humbled before. And he had such a unique story that he decided to tell everybody, including you and I, the price of pride is great. So we'll see you guys next week, and hope you have a good weekend.